Today, in our Tech Spotlight segment, I've invited Raul Perez, Executive Director of the Structured Investment Group at Wells Fargo Securities, to speak about the impact technology is having on the structured investments market. Raul, thanks so much for joining today.
Thank you for having me, Anastasia.
It's great to see you. And look, you spent the majority of your career in the space of structured investments. I imagine you've seen quite a few things along the way, the key milestones. So talk about those and where are we today relative to the past?
So in structured, I've been in the business for 20 plus years. Yes, you could imagine in anything in this world, 20 years is a long time, right? Things have massively changed in our industry, right? From something that's extremely manual process, person to person type of sales process to something that has evolved dramatically. I would say that probably the biggest thing, like we've seen in all things in the last probably 10 years, is that there's some entrants into the market that come in and they disrupt, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
And fintech is that, right? So we've seen this massive growth in our business. You know, our business was about $100 billion business and stayed stagnant for many years. And it's bolstered up to $190 billion, I think, last year. So we almost doubled our business. And that's probably because of technology and how we married that with the human element. I think that's still very important. We can't just rely just on the technology. We need the human element to kind of drive that.
So obviously we've seen huge growth in the market. And at the same time, I imagine there's still some hurdles that are remaining to further scaling SI with advisors and perhaps end clients. What do you see in terms of what are some of those hurdles today?
So the interesting part is I think that in 2022, when we saw the 60-40 break apart, I think that was an eye-opening experience for many advisors and for clients, right? They started realizing that they didn't have this bulletproof portfolio like they thought they did. And they're starting to realize I need alternatives, not just alternatives as in the private markets, but also in market-linked investments or structured products. And I think that's really where we've taken a lot of advisors that were more hesitant to be in this business and drove them forward. We need to continue that. And what we've been using a lot is the technology side to help bridge that gap of the knowledge for those advisors to learn about the product, manage the product, and really utilize it properly. And the technology piece is super important because they become extremely scalable. They can manage a huge book of business with a little amount of time because you just click a couple of buttons and it does all the work for you.
Right. And by the way, you spoke about the 60-40 breaking down in 2022. Well, actually, we also had a mini episode of 60-40 breaking down earlier this year.
That's true.
Around Liberation Day. So, once again, advisors can certainly think about how to allocate to structured investments to really help that overall portfolio construct. But to get more specific around the technologies, can you share with us some examples of, what kind of processes or, tech tools advisors are using today most often to help with the distribution side or just manage the ongoing SI business?
Yeah, so there's three major components, I think. There's always the educational aspect, which is super important, not just for the end client, but for the advisor themselves. So that's really been bolstered up significantly, especially on the iCapital platform. The second piece is your marketplace, which is where you could find all of the deals and be able to back test them and visually see how the product's going to work, which I think is super important. And then the final piece, which I think is probably the most important, is the lifecycle management.
Right.
Our business was always really good at the primary side, so selling the product, but then we always fell on our face on the banking side because we couldn't manage all of those past offerings that we did because we're always focused on the forward. Right. And I think that's really the big driver of where tech saved all the banks' lives, right? Because we just don't have the budgeting that some fintechs do to be able to build all these technology pieces for the problems we had. And then iCapital fixed that for us, right? So for us at Wells. So I think that's the real driver, is that when you have that lifecycle portal, that advisor now could plan out his book of business over the next 60, 90 days to know what's coming due, what coupons are going to be paid, so they could proactively go into their book of business and actually make it better.
And that's a really big deal, especially as the overall structured investment business grows and rapidly as it has. But speaking of that, what is the plan going forward? What do you think happens with SI growth again? And, what are the tech tools that you think will play center stage?
Well, look, at Wells Fargo, we're doing the best we can to really drive this technology piece to our advisors, right? So we've made it super easy for them. As they log into their systems every morning, they immediately have access to that system. And why we did that was because we want our advisors to live a very happy life, and technology is going to do that for them. What we've noticed is that we've doubled our business in the last couple of years, which is significant, but we want to do that again. And just like we want to do that, I think the overall industry wants to do that. And I think the next step, right, is to make the advisor's life even easier. And I think that's how we move forward in the industry, but we're going to need to do that with tech. So we're going to need to find maybe AI to help bridge that gap, right? Maybe have AI work on something so that when the client feels that there's a hole in their portfolio, AI will help them guide them into the right product.
Certainly, technology has the potential to make the advisor's lives easier, which at the end of the day, it's about really solving the problem for the end client. And certainly tech seems like it could play a really key role in doing that with structured investments. So Raul, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for joining us to talk about this important topic.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we'd like to hear from you. Send us an email at yourquestion@icapital.com and let us know what questions are the top of mind for you and your clients. I'm Anastasia Moroso, and thank you for joining us today on Beyond 6040. We'll see you next time.